I am Evan Davis. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at Votiro, and I am joined by two of our experts here, Michael from Votiro and Brad from Modern Managed IT. Brad, would you mind going ahead and introducing yourself?
Not at all. My name is Brad Getch, and I work for Modern Managed IT in San Antonio, Texas, where I am the security and compliance specialist.
Well, Michael?
Yep, Michael Bowen. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Votiro, and I help with doing technical presentations and proof of concepts with our customer base.
Very good. All right. Well, yeah, appreciate both of you guys joining today and sharing your insights. So with that, it looks like we've got a good chunk of folks in here. So let's go ahead and get started. So first question on the topic of Microsoft security that we want to open up with. Brad, it's actually going to go to you. A little while ago, we were talking about challenges with licensing sprawl, particularly. Would you mind going into some details about that topic?
Yeah, the licensing sprawl seems to be a pretty common issue with a lot of our clients. They a lot of times will have products with overlapping functionalities. Sometimes they're not um, all utilized properly, or they bought one thing and it does, half of the job, and then another thing, and, and they almost have to wrangle everything together, and it almost becomes like a tool fatigue thing.
Great to hear. Michael, he mentioned uh, some gaps in there. You know, if people are buying one particular license and they may have assumptions on what some security coverage that they may have that they may not actually be receiving. I know that's something that we hear from our customers as well. Can you jump into what some of those assumptions may be that we frequently hear about?
Yeah, so obviously the Microsoft landscape with the licensing is quite complicated. There's a lot of different feature sets depending on what levels of licensing you have. And so what we commonly see is customers will have purchased one level of licensing and they'll maybe get a component of a greater feature set and then they implement their the licensing in the process, and what ends up happening is they are not getting, or they're assuming they're getting a greater level of feature set between the different levels of licensing, and it ends up not being the case. So they're missing out on some assumed features, and that it creates some security gaps amongst the organization, where they're not getting the coverage either on the platforms they need, or even in the for instance, the endpoints and whatnot. So there, because Microsoft licensing is super complex, that it makes it difficult to know exactly what you need and what you're getting when you purchase that licensing.
Appreciate that insight. Brad, jumping back to you, can you go into a little bit more detail on, what some of those, other assumptions may be that you see in your clients as well?
I think it's a little bit of okay, primarily functionality. People buy a product and they see, all of the features that were sold to them. But there's a lot of devil in the details, and especially when it comes to the compliance stuff. Um, you know, with with the Microsoft licensing, I think that I don't want to jump ahead here, but it almost rolls into the next question where there's unless you have either Chat GPT or a professional by your side, just navigating what is actually covered and knowing where the threat vectors are, and what's not covered is really kind of hard to discern for the end user.
Yeah, great. So I think you kind of led into it there, and I see we got some activity in the chat there about E3 versus E5. A lot of this, coverage between plans that we're talking about here with various security features kind of goes into that question that we often hear from clients and customers about, whether they need to deploy E3 versus E5. There's a lot that goes into it, given budget constraints and these security coverages. Brad, can you give some of your expertise into how you advise clients to go with one versus the other and what they should be looking at?
Well, it's really not a one size fits all type of scenario. I think that there's a lot of people that go into this thinking that, it's going to be one type of license across the board. And from my experience, that's generally not needed. There are certain people where you really want to have all of the E5 features and the security, like the risk. I apologize, it's slipping my mind right now, but like the risk awareness and that sort of thing. And then there might be people that are never going to need that level. Um, uh, bring me back to the question again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just some tips that you have for the audience in determining kind of when to go for E3 versus E5. And it does look like we have somebody in the chat, bringing up a great point here where you can divide different types of users into E3 and E5. So looking at those two different scenarios, yeah, just some tips that you may have for the audience on, how to choose who goes where.
I think the biggest tip is just the biggest tip I've seen is to just have them walk you through their workflow, know what their role is in the organization, what is the risk appetite for that user. If this is, for example, a construction crew, someone out on out in the field. That is just checking email, they may not require the same security level that the CEO requires. So just be aware of their roles and what data they have access to and what features they would need. So I guess sort of put yourself in their shoes. That's kind of what I try to do is just listen to them and see how they use it on a day-to-day basis.
Great tip. Um, Michael, do you have anything extra to add there?
Um, I would say that like in the feature sets between them, I know there's basically when you step up from an E3 to an E5, you go from looking at more individual based security features to cloud-based and uh, features that they cover more areas of the ecosystem. So, and then there's also you start getting some automation features that happen in the E5. So again, like Brad said, it's primarily depending on the workflows and the tools that the end users are needing to have access to.
Great insights, y'all. So next, I actually want to hand it over to Michael. Yeah, I know one of the things that we look at a lot here at Votiro is in the instance of file security, making sure that files are being secured, going through and across the Microsoft ecosystem. I believe you may actually have a demo to show us regarding Teams that can then be applied to OneDrive and SharePoint and a bunch of different other Microsoft apps.
Yep, yep. So when it comes to securing your files, the Microsoft built-in tools, like and I kind of alluded to this in the previous question, is you start getting some of the basic feature sets in the E3 level. If you could stop sharing your screen, I'll pull up my share and let me show you this. So, when, for instance, like we'll talk about like Purview, right? In the Purview data set or the Purview feature set in the E3 level of licensing, you get the ability to start doing manual labeling. You get some sensitivity labels around that, but you don't end up with the ability to get the automated labeling. Also, you get some security features around Microsoft products and Microsoft tools, but you lose out, or you don't lose out, you just don't get the capabilities to secure other avenues. So, for instance, with Votiro, what we do as a product is and platform is we sanitize files and we remove malicious content from files. And we do that as the file is in motion, as it's transferred between users, as it's shared between users, as it comes in through email or OneDrive, or gets sent between an internal and an external user in Teams. So kind of to show you what we do in that avenue is we take a file, and let me show you an example here. I have an example file. This is a example resume. This resume has been loaded with a malware that is embedded inside of the file. At the same time, that file has some sensitive content embedded inside of this. This is obviously could be any file in your organization. It could be coming in from the outside. Obviously, you're worried about keeping your information secure and the malware out of the environment. But the places where Microsoft gets it right is, they have decent signature-based solutions that can detect malware, but where they're kind of lacking is in your zero-day malware or your unknown content that's coming into the organization. So that's where we add on to the feature set of Microsoft and work alongside of them, is that we can prevent that 0-day or unknown malware or unknown macros and scripting and all those things from entering the environment and causing havoc. So to show you how this works, like I said, I have an embedded script inside of this document that would launch a PowerShell and run some applications. And I'm going to share this across Teams. So this could be someone outside of the organization sending this into a share if you guys allow outside sharing. It could be coming in through email. It could come in from a number of other channels that we support. So obviously I've shared this document with my admin user. Obviously your admin user, you wouldn't want to get compromised, and hopefully your admins are much more knowledgeable around malware and whatnot coming into the organization. So I've shared that file through Teams. I go over here and I can see that that file has just come in. It took 1.5 seconds to sanitize. And this is where the Votiro comes in and the magic we do. When it comes to malware, we are a content disarm and reconstruction engine. So what we do is we take files apart, we break it down into all of the sub objects that make up the file. We look at every single object inside of it and validate that it is a known good object. And then we take that same file and recreate a new template of that file with only the positive content moved over to the new file. And so that allows us to not worry about signature-based malware. We only worry about the known good. As I look down here, I can see that that document that I sent through had that embedded zip file inside of it, and an LNK that would have launched a PowerShell script that could have wreaked havoc in my environment. This also, as we're scanning through that document, we found that sensitive content that was inside of that document, and we chose to actually mask it out in real time. So this single engine and this process has allowed us to both reduce malware risk as well as private content being shared amongst users that it should not be. If I go back to that file, I can see it looks identical here. But if I open that file and look at it, I can show you that the content that used to be in that file is no longer there. The sensitive content has been masked out. This is controllable through our policies, so you have the ability to keep your sensitive data private amongst the users that need access to it, and allow you to share the document and continue doing your workflows without completely blocking it, which is common in your DLP type solutions that they're built into Microsoft. That same malicious content that was built into that zip has been removed. And so now we've been able to block out and keep the malware from entering the environment. And we do that all in real time, and we do it without user interaction. from either IT or from the end users. So like this is a place, again, like I said, Microsoft does some good capabilities when it comes to known good content, but or excuse me, known malicious content, but not unknown content. Brad, do you have anything to add to that as far as the Microsoft security tools and how they work with incoming content and securing files moving through the organization?
I do not actually.
Okay. No worries. I know that it's with the Defender in Microsoft does a pretty good job of doing it, but that's where we add on top of that to help um, prevent the additional malicious content from coming into the organization.
We use other third-party tools for that, but
Yeah, no, and it's great to see that through Teams. I know, Michael, that is a very common area of concern that you hear from the security leaders and practitioners that you talk to every day, and yeah, just confirming that those both content disarm reconstruction capabilities and that private data masking can be applied to the other areas of the Microsoft ecosystem as well. Whether that same content and malicious threats are being shared via email or are hidden in your OneDrive or your SharePoint elsewhere in places. Votiro does plug those gaps across the Microsoft ecosystem.
Yep.
Something I want to go back to that you mentioned a little bit ago, and we actually had a question coming through the chat, is about Purview. So the capabilities that we are seeing right now, or that you just demonstrated for us, are specific to the Votiro platform. But look at Purview. It is another very common topic that gets brought up. What challenges do you often see people have as they're starting to implement Purview, and just any general tips and tricks you'd say about, or that people should consider as they get Purview started to set up?
Yeah, so Purview, I would say let me take a step back. So typically, Purview goes through a process, a long process. Initially, you start out with trying to define what types of data in the environment are important to label. And then obviously that involves creating your different label types, whether you want them to be sensitive and available only to internal users, if you want certain types of data to be accessible outside. So that's where the journey typically starts, is defining the most sensitive content for sharing in the environment. At that point, that's when you've implemented the labels. And if you're in the E3 level of licensing, you now have to train and make your end users understand that they need to label the content as they're dealing with it. That's obviously the biggest challenge, and one of the primary differences between E3 and E5 is your purview labeling is a manual process, and you rely on your end users to label it properly. And as we all know, many end users, they'll do one of two things. They'll either label it incorrectly out of ignorance and not knowing that they need to label it a certain way, or they know, especially if DLP solutions have been turned on, they start to understand that if they label it too restrictive, it starts preventing their job and for making it harder for them to do the tasks that they want to. So they will incorrectly label it so that they can have an easier time doing their job, right? And so that's one of the challenges you get in the early levels of E3 and Purview. When you've gone down your journey a little bit further, you've gotten to the point where you maybe you've moved up to E5. You've got some automated labeling. The Microsoft platform will obviously scan content similar to what we do, but it tends to be a little overzealous and a little bit too broad in its labeling. So a lot of times you end up with files that are incorrectly labeled too restrictive. And then that creates another task similar to when people manually label it incorrect or manually label it too restrictive. And that if you've turned on the blocking features of Purview, you start getting lots of IT tickets and frustration among your users. So the journey is typically a very drawn out journey. And what ends up happening at the end is a lot of times is your users, you end up turning off some of the features because they get to be too cumbersome and tiresome for both the end users and the IT staff. So it's a long journey that many times ends up in frustration and sometimes failure. So that's kind of the big issues with Purview. And that's kind of also where, like, when I showed you our masking features, we can do a lot of the features of that blocking that Purview has, but without restricting the users from doing their tasks and working along the lines and allowing them to be able to share the data they want, because you're only blocking out and removing the sensitive content itself instead of blocking the entire file.
Appreciate that insight. That's a lot of great points. Brad, kind of kicking that over to you. What other challenges, or do you have any tips for, your customers that you work with, whenever they are setting up to kind of avoid some of these pitfalls that that Michael just brought up?
Well, one of the biggest issues that we've ran into is organizations having diverse data sources. Some of it's on-premise, some of it's cloud or SaaS, making the unified experience difficult. I think going into it, a thorough assessment is probably like the first thing I would recommend. Um, Start with a pilot program. How much time do people want to invest in this? How detailed do they want to get? Um,
Yeah. So, and Rush brings up a great point in the chat is, there's a misconception of, kind of set it and forget it with Purview that can really lead to some challenges down the road.
Yep. The idea with Purview is the organization's always changing. It's typically enhancing itself. It's adding more capabilities. It's dealing with more processes. And if you're not constantly carrying and feeding Purview and its labeling activities, you end up with uh, your files, or excuse me, you end up with your policies not working or becoming obsolete. So it's definitely a care and feeding and a lot of additional um, work that needs to be done with Purview in order to keep it up to date and working properly.
Good, good. So, on this piece of, looking at the data labeling, making sure you are defining what those crown jewels are with the data that you need to protect most. I know, Michael, you mentioned earlier that Votiro can kind of help in and step in with some of that automatic data labeling. Do you have another demo to quick show about what that looks like once that environment's been scanned, how to analyze that data, and where to find it in your environments?
Yeah, definitely. So the obviously Purview, you've created your labels and you have obviously created the baseline of the Purview and the labeling. So what we've are able to do is using our AI machine learning engine, we can take the labels that you have already defined and we can apply those labels to all of your documents as they move around. So we can take that automatic labeling capability that you typically get with your E5 licensing, and then except you can get it obviously at the E3 level. Also, our engine is very, very good at finding the data and the context around it so that you can get that easier labeling capabilities without relying on the end user. It can also take, if a label has been applied incorrectly by the user, it can actually change and update that label as well. Once that's been applied, it helps your DLP solutions work better. At the same time, because we're scanning these files as they move in motion, we are able to report on the types of information that's being transacted between your users. And you can actually come into the platform and find out which files have been shared amongst which users, what information is in that file. We can get reporting on that, so you can make some decisions around which users in the organization are transacting the most sensitive content. If you, obviously in this instance, if this user that I'm got highlighted here is not somebody that you expect to be transacting and say social security numbers or something along those lines, maybe that's a item you can take and do some user education, or at least look into why they're doing that. So we have the ability to look through all of the different types of data that are flowing through the organization and find which files have that data, so that you can make some decisions around who needs access to that information. So it works right along with the Microsoft licensing and the E5 and E3 labeling.
Some appreciate that, Michael. So then moving on into our last primary question here. As we all know, Microsoft is a very useful system. Ton of people and companies around the world use it. Brad, do you just have any general tips for the audience that you have where they can leverage more from what's typically a very large investment in the Microsoft ecosystem?
I'm sorry, can you be a little more specific? Like,
Uh, yeah, just looking at the challenges that you typically see, how you typically work with customers to set up Microsoft systems, make sure they're the most secure. What typical tips and processes do you go through to help them get the most out of that investment? Making sure they're secure.
understand under understanding their risk appetite, the threat landscape for their business, understanding their workflow, understanding their budget, I think is necessary. But really, I think the biggest thing that I have found with our customers is just spending time with them, seeing how they use the products. There's a lot of little bells and whistles that, whether it's security or if it's just basic functionality, that unless you are in this environment, all day, every day, Microsoft is changing it constantly. Um, I think that if you listen to your customers and try to find out what their end goal is, and then go back and see what you might be able to turn on or configure for them to help get the end result. I would say just be patient with the product and be patient with the people that they're helping you. Just also be very vocal about what you intend to do and how you need to use it. I think a lot of people go into Microsoft and they feel like there's a little bit of a fixed workflow, and to a big degree there is, but there is some flexibility, once you get in there. And then also with the security, a lot of folks buy one plan, like they'll just go in and get the E3 license and think that everything's going to be fine. But Microsoft, in their sort of infinite wisdom, the way they slice up their products, there might be a whole, uh, there might be a lot of logs, for example, that you're missing, or there might be some functionality that you didn't even consider that is available in another third-party product or in the license level. So I think, yeah, just be patient with the product and ask lots of questions.
Yeah, and I like what you said earlier about coming in with a plan of knowing kind of what you want to get out of it, and defining those parameters. I know, particularly whenever we're talking with um, security leaders and practitioners, that's a big piece is, understanding, we call them the crown jewels with the data that you want to secure, making sure you have that prioritized and coming in with a plan to, help best find the solution that's going to fit for you. Michael, could just kind of toss on the same question over to you to finish us off here.
No, actually, I think Brad kind of covered most of it. The primary thing is understanding that you cannot just buy one level of Microsoft licensing and expect everything to be covered and not evaluate specific needs that you can get with either add-ons or upgrades on specific users depending on their workflows. But yeah, I think Brad covered it really well.
All right, great to hear. So with that, we're reaching the end of our session here. Between a lot of the things that Michael covered and Brad covered today, we did wrap up a lot of this in a little feature comparison chart that we'll be sending out to everybody after the session as well. It covers a lot of the basic plans, with E3 and E5 and how Votiro kind of fits into a lot of those situations. We often find whenever we're talking with our prospects and our customers that E3 plus Votiro tends to be a pretty solid solution because it also comes in around half the cost of an E5 license. So something to consider, like Brad was mentioning, is not necessarily just jumping straight to E5, but looking out for third-party tools that, if you have that defined set of parameters of what you're looking for and what you're hoping to get out of your Microsoft security is, a solution like Votiro or others out there may be good ones to bring in to help see if you can get that added coverage for less cost. And with that, we are close to wrapping it up. Just want to give a thanks to everybody who attended today. We'll monitor the chat and see if there are any questions that we can address here at the end. I think I saw one that may be being addressed by Russ in the chat, but Brad, this one may be good for you. Addressing the fact that anybody can set up trail tenants on domains without domain admin approval, and then looking at some various ways that people can bypass multi-factor authentication. Do you want to take a minute or two to address some of those concerns from the audience?
I would actually have to investigate that. I don't have an answer off the top of my head for that.
Okay, great. Well, we'll get back to
Yeah,
person asked.
I can find an answer and get back with Kathleen if you guys have a way to contact her.
Yeah,
I saw Chris had a good comment about data security is obviously important, but regulating access to the information is more efficient. That's a good point. What I've seen in my years in this security field is that is one level that needs to be covered. But what happens is, especially depending on the size of the organization, is when an organization is smaller, it's very easy to manage access to the files. But as the organization grows and it gets more complicated, and especially if you get some rapid growth and changes as people leave and join the organization or move between different parts of the organization, you end up with permissions. Users end up with permissions that they shouldn't have anymore, or that maybe they need. And so, absolutely, you managing the permissions on the files is very good. But the gaps is when those permissions become unwieldy. Obviously, in very large organizations where you're getting thousands of users, you have thousands of group permissions. People are in dozens, if not hundreds, of different groups, and it gets very complicated to manage those permissions. And that's where, like with our solution, because we are looking at the data in motion and not where the data is at rest, if someone has access to a location where they shouldn't, and they get a hold of a file, and they try to share it with someone else, we step in and we block the sensitive content in that motion. So you definitely need a layered approach to your security organization, but absolutely, permissions management is one of the key parts of that equation. Anyway, sorry, I just saw a good question
you're
there.
good. No, that was great. Appreciate you jumping in there, Michael. Well, with that, we can give it, another minute or two here. If any other questions come through, I don't see many coming through, so we can probably wrap it up. If you have any other questions after the session ends, you can reach out to that email alias that you see there on the screen, info@votiro.com, and we will work with our and partners at Modern Managed IT to get your questions answered. With that, we appreciate everybody attending and hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Michael and Brad, really appreciate you joining and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.